So I'm here with Sharon Critchlow, who's a fellow colleague on ACCA's Global Council with me. Welcome, Sharon.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. From the other side
Good.
of the planet, isn't Zoom a wonderful thing?
That's right. We're here today to talk about well-being, a very important aspect of organizational life these days. And yeah, Sharon, I suppose if you could just maybe kick us off with just to give me a little bit of understanding of your background in that space and how it connects in with accountants and the work of accountants in the modern workplace.
Well, if I start off with that, actually, if we start off with the role of accountants, is that yes, we're the gatekeepers of a lots of things, including the gatekeepers of money. And of course, you know, your staff typically are the most expensive part of your P&L in a lot of businesses. But actually, we don't really pay a lot of attention to what we get out of those staff. Now, if you're in practice and you're doing you know, you're billing out people by the hour, then maybe you pay a bit of attention to what's going on there. But typically in a lot of businesses, you know, you've got the wage bill and then you've got these sort of outcomes. And what we tend to do is we focus on sales. We don't necessarily focus on productivity. And, you know, there's a lot of research out there now that demonstrates that getting the most out of your staff, you know, people talk about employee engagement and whatever, but actually there's a lot of research out there that says if you can get the people in your business to love you, love the business, you're going to get so much more out of them. And I think in a very highly digitized world that we live in, the people aspect of that business is actually, it's less on the processing, it's less on the day-to-day humdrum stuff. And what you're really bringing people in for is more creative things, but you're not going to get that creativity out of them if they're stressed, if they've got mental health issues, if they don't feel that they're valued, they're not going to put their head above the parapet and say, do you know what, I think there's a better way of doing this. So there's lots of really good reasons why now, particularly with even more digitization, why we need to really look at how we treat people and what the people in the business are there for. And because they do cost such a lot of money, you know, you need to focus on that as an accountant.
Yeah, right. Okay. So it's sort of, as you're talking there, it's reminded me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, there's a level where people have, you know, obviously safety needs and physiological needs and food and water, but then it starts to get into, you know, am I valued? Am I loved? Am I wanted? And then am I respected? I think is the next level up. And then I think the highest point is around, am I getting to make a difference? And I think that's what you're getting at, right? It's do we feel like our people are contributing to something bigger than, say, even us? It's getting into the higher levels of value there.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about, you know, I've been talking about environmental social governance now for 5 years, you know, before it was even really something that was in the press, because my background is finance, but finance from a financial services perspective. I've been looking at capital markets for over 20 years. So I've been looking at where people put their money and looking at where environmental impacts are happening and looking at the social side. So we're talking gender pay gap and things like that, and how they're influencing where the big money goes, because eventually that always filters down to what your high street businesses end up having to do, because further up the food chain, this is where, you know, the real big demands are. But I'd say that there's a push from both sides now. So not only have we got higher up the chain, people saying that I only want to put money into things which are environmental friendly, where people are respected and whatever. At the other end, we also have this push of the next generation. So we call them Gen Z with ACCA. But, you know, you've got that new generation coming through that want to do something that makes a difference. So you've got to push from both directions here. And yeah, businesses, particularly with the pandemic, can hide behind lots of different things and can say, look, we're just trying to get through. But there'll come a point where you've actually got to tackle that and go, is just getting through it going to be enough? Are we really going to thrive in the longer term? Because of course, a lot of this just pure profit driven behaviors that we've had, you know, in the last 100 years have been, you know, they've been quite short term vision. And actually, when you look at people and when you look at the planet and when you look at purpose, this is about bigger pictures and longer term. And so that's absolutely stuff that accountants are really good at. Give them a cash flow, they love it. We do, don't we, though?
Yeah,
you know, and it's all about planning for the future and understanding the future. But we need to understand the context of the future is changing, and what people expect and what people want is changing.
Yeah, so I think, look, I've had conversations that have touching off this issue for quite a while with a few people, and it's about accountants' ability to change the mindset is somehow, I would, or how some describe it, but it's about how do we help accountants to be able to quantify those other aspects other than cash flow and productivity and, you know, headcount and cost of labor, into the value proposition that they're either putting forward or that they're looking to endorse or support by somebody else in an organization that has put it forward. So how do you value gender pay gap, as an example?
Yeah, I mean,
how do you value the impact on the environment, as an example?
Yeah, so I suppose you've got a couple of different ways to look at this, and it depends on the industry you're in. So, you know, eventually governments will legislate for a lot of this stuff. And we're already starting to see things come through that say, you know, you've got to start to, let's say in the UK, gender pay gap, depending on the size of your business, is the thing that you need to report on. So, you know, the things are starting to come into place where you're going to have to account for your behaviours. And the thing to remember as well is that these behaviours become very transparent in the modern world. So this isn't just when you're looking for finance, for example. My business recently went to the bank, not for money, as it turns out. They put out a thing saying, we want to showcase so many businesses on our website. And this is a global organisation. On their website, they want to highlight some businesses. But in order to get onto that shortlist, you had to prove what you're doing that's of social benefit. Now, when high street banks are starting to put that into things, okay, it's a bit of a promo, you know that that's how they're thinking. So if you don't know what you do is of social benefit, the moment you're under a bit of pressure and you've got to go to the bank and go, you know, we need to extend the overdraft, we need more money, and you find that half the form is around what you're doing that supports the environment, that shows you're ahead of the game, and you're not ahead of the game, guess what? It makes getting money expensive. So I would say that this is about future proofing as much as anything else. So when you're measuring these things, you've got to think about, what does my customer expect? Because again, you know, customers are moving a lot, particularly since the start of the pandemic. The sales chains are changing quite a lot in terms of where people buy, what people buy, and why they buy it, and why they should buy it from you. So even though you might think, well, you know, I've looked at the figures and we seem to be okay. Are you looking backwards or are you looking forwards? Do you know what your customers value about what you do? And are you actually setting the business up to exceed those expectations, or at the very least meet those expectations? Or actually, you know, are their expectations going in a different direction to the way that you're planning, and you think that it's going to be business as usual, but the usual that they want isn't the same? So when you're measuring this, I think it's got to start by measuring what it is that you think is the future for your industry, your sector, your business, and then measure where you are to that and where you are to your competitors. Because this is the other thing, is that we've become very global, haven't we? And even quite small businesses have become very global. And you may think that you shine in your sector, but you may shine in your sector in Australia. But if you don't shine in your sector globally, somebody else from, you know, halfway around the world could be taking your clients away from you. So, you know, looking at, you know, where are you? You may not be able to measure your share of the market very accurately, but I think you need to be this cognizant thing of where you are to the trends that are around you, because that should be influencing where you put your money and where you put your efforts, and where you start to push at a board level as well for, are we asking the right questions? Because this is about governance. This is about actually understanding what you do and how you do it, and making sure that when you do move perhaps in a slightly different direction, you do it in a way that you're proud of, and you don't just do things as a knee-jerk reaction, as a last minute, as a chuck lots of money at it because we have no choice. And so that's what can happen when it legislates. That can also happen when all of a sudden you start to lose big contracts.
So I think just to summarize what you're saying there, so number one, governments are going to start regulating on this because, and that's touching off the S part of the ESG that you talked about.
Yeah.
So it's about making sure that we've got a fair and equal society, or fair and equitable society. Then you're saying that the providers of capital are putting these kind of things on their checklist for whether or not they're going to give you money. So whether they're shareholders or whether they're banks or other institutions, they're now looking beyond profit motive to where they rest their capital for a while. And then the last point I think you were talking about was the market share and threat to your threats to your business through having a wider globalized marketplace. So given those imperatives, let's call it, you now need to look at how you and sorry, I don't want to touch out so much off gender pay, because this is about well-being as well. It's not about necessarily about gender equality. It's about well-being of employees, no matter whether they're male, female, ethnic background or whatever. So tell me a bit about well-being and how does that fit into this story?
So actually, where gender pay and well-being stand side by side, it's about culture. Because a culture of well-being in a business, I don't mean, we all turn up in the morning and have a group hug. What I mean is it's about your attitude when things change. It's about your attitude towards your staff generally, towards their personal growth, towards, the sorts of adaptations that you're willing to make for them and what you expect from them as well. So, and that fits very closely with gender pay, with any other discriminatory types of behaviours. This is all about culture. And I don't mean the big headlines around, the policies you have in place, which obviously you need to have, but I mean, it's about how we do things around here. Yeah. And well-being is a very big one on how we do things around here. So as managers, if you've got teams and somebody isn't well, how easy is it for them to flag that up early, so that if they do have to take a bit of time, it's 2 days, not 2 months.
Yeah.
So I think
it's about consistently doing the right thing as well. It's not one rule for the decision makers and one rule for everybody else. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's also, with remote workers, which a lot of businesses now have, it's about how you maintain that culture. I've spoken to somebody very recently who's very specialist in her field, and she's thinking of moving employers because she also has caring responsibilities, and there's a charter in the business she works for with that allows her to take these times and flex around things to take care of the people she needs to take care of. But her managers knew. And when she said, well, I need to do this, it's already been in the diary, et cetera, he said no. And she's like, but the care charter, and he says, don't care. And the thing is, he's only been there 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month, whatever it is. And she's been there for 10 years. And now she's looking to move because of that. And that's because they're not, in that organisation, they're quite clearly not upholding their values and making that really clear to the people coming in. So even though you may think you have a really strong culture and that you're not going to have a problem, every time you bring in somebody else, you have to really assimilate them and make sure that they understand what's important and what's acceptable and what's allowable and where the flex lies, because else your culture is going to move in other directions and you may not realize until you start losing top talent. And of course, this is about talent. This is about talent retention. None of us really want to work for somebody who doesn't care. And if the pandemic's shown something to all of us, it's shown who cares and who doesn't care. So who wants to work, who wants to give their time and effort to people who don't care?
So the other aspect of this, we talked about access to capital and regulatory and all those kind of imperatives, but the other one is that you want to attract the best talent to your organization. And it's not just about like you talk, having group hugs or anything like that. We want to be working on important things that customers out there want and that we're making a difference. So the people who you're getting at, those Gen Z people for sure, and a lot of others in Gen X's, for instance, want to feel like you're making a difference. That you're not just going to work to get a salary to pay a mortgage to feed your kids. Like, it has to be some meaning to life.
Absolutely. And, you know, as a Gen X myself, you're part of the reason I ended up in wellbeing is because I went through a bit of a wellbeing crisis myself.
Yeah.
And having come out the other end of it, I noticed what other people had also gone through and how so many people get into their mid 40s to early 50s and they give up on corporate life. So they got some really experienced people there and they just give up because it's too complicated to try and balance, you know, maybe kids coming through, maybe an illness or something like the menopause, and having to deal with perhaps elderly relatives and the pressure of everything else. And it's not that they're not capable, it's just that, you know, they'd rather go out and do a bit of consulting than actually stay there and try and be pulled in so many different directions in an inflexible way. So it's every generation actually, and I think if there's something particularly in the UK that we've been spotting is that people have taken the last 18 months as a bit of a period of reflection. They've had more time at home with their slightly older children, maybe. They've had time to miss other family members. They've had time to decide what's important in their lives. And for a lot of people, they've decided work isn't actually that high on the priority anymore. And all of those really long working days and all of that commuting time, you know, they don't want to go back to it necessarily.
Yeah,
they've
saved all the government handout checks now and they don't feel they have to work anymore.
I don't know about that. but you know, it is those things of that reprioritizing on your life, that people have had that time because there hasn't been all the usual distractions out there. And so, you know, be prepared for the fact that people you think are really happy with what they do, have been really dedicated, might have actually had a chance to reflect and now may not be quite so pleased that they work for you.
Definitely. And I think it's going to be hard for I mean, people talked about this being the new normal, and you know, that sort of phraseology annoys me a little bit. But there's definitely people are going to be resistant to going back to the old way of working, with everybody commuting into an office from 9 to 5, the way we used to. So there's going to be some fallout from that for sure, and unless organizations set up right for employees to be able to be flexible and adaptable, use technology and that to get outcome driven work done, then they're going to find themselves with a few more resignees, I think.
Yeah, and this is something as well. I mean, we've certainly had very senior people in the UK saying, well, if you're not in the office and you maybe get passed over for promotion and all the rest of it. And, you know, as accountants and actually as HR people, I think we need to be resisting some of that and saying, well, hang about, shouldn't promotion be based on outcomes and talent and, you know, and who we think is going to be the right person for the job, and not necessarily on who the boss knows.
Yeah, for sure. So
you know,
tell us about some of the specific things that organizations can do to make their organization more of a well-being, positive environment. I'm probably not even using the right phraseology or terminology there, so help me with that as well. But what are the types of things that organizations should be doing?
Well, I think the first thing's got to be to have a think about being open and honest where you can. So we all know in business, particularly the more senior you get, you cannot tell everybody everything all the time because things move very quickly and it can lead to a lot of upset where there doesn't need to be any. But I think have a think about how the world sees you, and are you pleased with that? You know, what as a business, what do you want to be known for? And are you known for that when it comes to your staff? Because this is the other thing, is that there's a lot of transparency out there. You know, we've got websites in the UK where if you work for somebody and you've had a bad experience, they put the review on you up there. So your top talent you want to attract, you think you're really great and funky, is looking at that and going, maybe not. So have a review on what people think. Survey your teams. What do they need? How are they struggling? Have they been struggling? Have you actually, has anybody asked them? You know, quite often we hear things that, oh no, everyone's fine. And you think, you survey them once every 2 years. You know, how do you know if everything's fine or not fine? And also, you know, again, there is a tendency to want to put together sort of wellbeing plans, which are around that are just around whatever somebody in HR thinks might be a fun thing to do, as opposed to actually thinking about how's this going to deal with our underlying issues. Your underlying issues may be actually around leadership or management. So it may be that people are struggling, they're struggling to do their job, it's making them more stressed, and that could be because you need more leadership training, or your managers need to know how to communicate better in these sorts of environments. So it's not just about the fluffy stuff, but yes, you can put in, and I do love the fluffy stuff, I put the woo in woo woo, I love it, but say again, open the doors to some of these things and just see what they like the look of, see what helps them. Because just to put a bit of stats around this, the Chartered Institute of Personal Development a few years ago ran a survey on absence management. They run one every year, but the stats from a couple of years ago said that if you've got a team of 10 people and they're under a lot of pressure and they're really stressed, 8 of them will struggle to concentrate. Well, that's great because you're paying for that. And then 6 of them will take longer to do the job, and you're paying for that as well. So you can ignore it if you like, but come on. 5 of them are likely to be unhelpful to your customers. You're paying for that. And 3 of them are likely to fall out with the rest of the team, and you're paying for that as well. So think about what you're really paying for. And if they are under prolonged stress and you're not giving them any help with how to deal with that, then that's what you're paying for. That's the outcomes that you're looking at.
Yeah. So all of those things sound very practical, and they're humanistic. Like there's not a lot of very prescriptive stuff you're talking about. It's not regulatory reporting or compliance or checklists in there. It's really about being true to what it is that you want to be known for. Who are you serving? Who are your customers? What do they want? How can you make them give them a positive experience through engaging with your organization? It's about finding out from your people what they want, how are they, are you okay, and what can we do to help? And then you're talking about basic leadership training. I mean, it's not about sort of performance management or anything. There we're talking about giving them opportunities to learn and develop as individuals as well.
Absolutely. And this is about, some of the things that people struggle with, particularly when it comes to discrimination or when it comes to mental health, is they don't have the words and they feel a bit afraid. So they make a bit of a hash of it. And so the thing is, if they've gone through some training, so they understand a bit about mental health, when somebody says to them, and you have a policy that says you can speak to your manager about this, or you can speak to these people about this or that, then if somebody comes to you and says that they've gone to the doctor and they're suffering with depression, you've actually got a process in place that the manager's not going to think, oh, I wonder what that is. That you actually understand what that is. You've got a process in place, and that you know how to support them. Now, there's something that we suggest that is quite useful for companies, which is a wellbeing action plan. And you can do these when people join an organisation, but also you could do them at reviews. And the more often that you do it and you revise it, the more normal it becomes in an organisation. So a wellbeing action plan is about understanding what that individual needs. Now, we used to do this more typically if somebody had something like diabetes or something which is likely to or could potentially cause an issue in the office. So epilepsy, that sort of thing, that would say, okay, so if this comes on, what would you like us to do? Who do we need to call? How do we help you if this happens? But actually, with anxiety, and to put this into context, that's 1 in 4 people will have, at any one point, will have a potential mental health challenge. So that could be depression, that could be anxiety, that could be mixed anxiety, depression, it could be bipolar, it could be, there's a whole range of things. But a lot of your workforce have probably got some of that right now. But if it comes to a head at any point, if they're struggling to cope, where's your manager going to go with this? You sort of say, if you've been to your GP, great, my job's done. Well, great, but you still have to manage the performance of that person. So understanding, who, if this happens, who do we need to contact? What support do you need? If they're coming back in the office, is being in the office a good idea for you or not? Is having that routine a good idea for you or not? And actually making that a normal conversation to be having that says, so whatever those challenges are, and you can broaden that out into, I've got elderly parents and a young family. I say, okay, so, what sorts of challenges does that give you? And how do we need to support you with that?
Yeah.
And of course, it's the contract that goes both ways, because this isn't a way of just the employer just giving everything. This means that, if you are a diabetic and you have a tendency to go into diabetic comas, then, you can make that agreement between you that says, okay, we'll support you when this happens, but we'd also like to make sure that you have an annual checkup and that you have these other things, that you're trying to make yourself as well as you can.
Yeah.
And then we'll try and support you if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I was going to say, when, as you were talking about some of those sort of more deeper health issues, right? Okay, so those aside for the moment, because of course there's medical considerations in there, but in the general workforce, there's personal responsibility has to come into it as well. It's about how you live, what, the kind of foods you eat, the kind of exercise that you do, the kind of behaviors that you have around the office, and how you interact with your own colleagues. Like those things, it is a contract to come and work for an organization. And I remember an old boss of mine many years ago talking about a business that he was a partner in the business, but it had been going for 35 or 40 years, but he wasn't one of the original partner team, and none of the original partner team were there anymore. And this business had gone for 35 years with all various people coming in and out of it and contributing to it. And it was now a completely different entity than what it was way back then. And it was really about this idea that an organization is almost like a living organic entity, and we all only have a little bit of time as we sort of pass through it, and what we leave and how we interact with people through that is really important. It's almost like without getting crazy here now, it's sort of almost like a life force thing, and that's so important, that you bring your best self to those organizations, and you will get the opportunity to do your best work with the best people.
Yeah. And this is the other thing, is that, so, digitization, basic jobs for a lot of the time have gone, and you want people to be more creative. They're there to do the more complex thinking. You cannot do complex thinking if you're stressed. So have a think about that. The next thing is, as my father always said, he says, well, why do you need work? Why do you need well-being in the workplace? What's all that about? But I would argue that actually the workplace is one of the last communities that we have. So you go back 100 years and people knew everyone in their village or their town and all their neighbours. And so if you were under the weather, if things weren't going well, people would notice. People would step in and take care of your kids. People would do stuff to help. Most people now in urban societies don't even know who their next door neighbour is.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. I think something, around how religion or people going to mass has sort of died off. Like that's a really big detraction from that.
All of that as well. And then, even where there are other communities that people belong to, quite often they're based on or more competitive things. So it might be a running club, or it might be something. It's not necessarily a social aspect in the truest sense. And so therefore, for a lot of people, their workplace actually is the last community they have.
And they're spending whatever, it must be like 60% of the waking hours there. It's probably 80% of their waking hours in a normal week, in a work week. So you got to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And when we talk about well-being, we talk about mind, body, spirit, and vision. So I think mind, is a fairly obvious one when it comes to mental health, but also how you relax and how you understand how to relax your mind, because that will also broaden your outlook and your growth mindset. So it's quite useful to have those sorts of practices, or that sort of availability in a business. Body is an obvious one around nutrition, hydration, fitness, and all of those sorts of things, which actually, when you talk well-being in companies, they said, oh yeah, we've got a half-price gym membership and a yoga and whatever. So that people understand the body bit a bit more. But what about sleep?
Yeah.
If you're not sleeping, if your people aren't sleeping, and there may have been one or two things going on recently, a bit stressful, if your people aren't sleeping, then their performance is likely to tank along with their energy. So have a think about that. And when we talk spirit, we talk about creativity, we talk about community and emotional intelligence. So we talk about how we connect with each other. And that can be a lot around happiness as well. So I'm not saying, you have to make everybody happy clappy, but the thing is, if they understand their purpose, and they understand where they are in your organization, they're going to give you so much more. You know, so think about their happiness, think about what you can do to make them want to bind to you. If I've got some statistics here by Garton and Mankins, says that an engaged employee is 45% more productive than a merely satisfied employee. And what's more interesting is that an inspired employee, and that's one who has a profound personal connection to their work and or their business, is 55% more productive than an engaged employee. So, you know, HR talks about employee engagement. What about employee satisfaction?
So now you're getting on to, where we sort of opened up the conversation here about how do accountants, there's two things going in the back of my head. So one of them is, how do accountants quantify the value proposition for investing in your employees' well-being? And then the second one is something around how can accountants use their core skills, that's part of it. But the other, I think, is around certainly where, say, ACCA or accounting, the accounting profession would say, is using the power of reporting to build transparency. So just on that first one, which is about how do we measure those statistics that you're talking about, are really powerful, right? So sorry, just give me that last one there where you said 45%.
So it's 55%. So if you've got an inspired employee, they're 55% more productive than an engaged employee.
Right. So somebody who's engaged, somebody who's engaged will be X. Somebody who's inspired will be 55% more productive than that, right? So that's quantifiable somehow, right? So if we have less engaged people, more inspired people, then we would be 55% more productive overall.
Exactly.
So then the question is, how do you determine the baseline for what you've got right now? So how many engaged versus inspired employees have we got?
I think that's where you probably need to get some professional help, but it's certainly where you need to start looking at surveying your staff, not just once, but perhaps do it regularly over a 3-month period, because everyone has a bad day, you know, and everyone has a good day, and that's not necessarily, you know, indicative of their whole experience. But do it and to get a baseline, and then highlight what it is that you don't like the look of,
right? What
it is in there that you think, oh, well, we thought that was going really well. And actually people think in reality it's not working. Well, let's have a look at why it's not working. So it could be that some of your survey says that the policies around mental health, I feel supported by the team for my mental health. I feel supported by the team for the policies around mental health. The policies around mental health are being used appropriately. And you might look at it and it might be, some people feel a bit supported, but most people are saying that the policies aren't actually being used properly. So, you know, maybe they don't even know these policies exist. Yeah.
And there's going to be a whole range. There's going to be a whole spectrum of people. Some people whose expectations of what should be there are going to be lower than what others are in their expectations. So I think, you know, as you're talking there, I'm thinking, so you can gauge a level for your employees. You can aspirationally set a higher level. You can say, let's say the gap was 20%, you can take 20% times your workforce times dollar numbers. that would give you a value if you wanted to put that into a value.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it goes beyond just basic, you know, headcount cost of removing headcount or increasing headcount as a measure by which a business case stacks up. It's got more quantifiable metrics to it. I think that's where I'm finding from other conversations I've had that accountants aren't so good at doing that. They're not so good at quantifying the other benefits of change.
No. But actually, we're going to have to get better at it because, you know, going back to what we said at the beginning around what banks are looking for, what investors are looking for, you know, the world's becoming more transparent. And, you know, if you're saying as a business that you do X, Y, and Z, and that you're supporting the world in this way, and then you've got employees going out on the internet saying, no, you don't, then you've got a real credibility issue. that goes beyond PR. It stops you from taking on top talent. It'll stop you from getting the big investors interested. So, you've got to have a think about the fact that your staff, your customers and your investors in this day and age could actually all be the same person.
Yeah, and I think if you take it down from, say, the big corporate environment there, and even just bring it into small tech businesses who are looking to create new apps or systems or whatever it is they want to get out there, it's the same thing. Your employees have got to feel like they're valued, listened to, use their best skills, whether it's creativity or technical quantifying analysis skills, and that they get the flexibility to be able to work to almost bring work and life together. Because I think that's what the for me, that's what the pandemic has really brought out, is this happiness of people to be able to work and play together, or work and have home life together. I don't mind working from home, but I want to be able to do some home things during the work day, and I would like to continue that.
And this is it. This is about trust, isn't it? This is about trusting your teams, that they don't have to be sat in an office in front of you, that they're actually, you're going to look at the outcomes, you're going to know what the outcomes are for these people, and you're going to measure them against that. And at the end of the day, do you really care if they did that at 6 o'clock in the evening and had a couple of hours off when the children came home from school? Do you really care, as long as it's been done? And that's
I think exactly where the challenge is for accountants, is to be able to quantify outcomes and not inputs. So it's easy to quantify, I've got 5 people here and they're costing me $100,000 each, that's $500,000, right? That's easy to do that. And they leave the outcome, the evaluation of the outcomes, to the managers of those people. So I think accountants need to get better at saying, okay, I hear you want 5 people, help me understand what you're going to get out of them, and what difference is it going to make to our organization as a whole? And then how do we measure against that? How do we track that to make sure that we're on course and that we're delivering the things that we set out to deliver, which presumably are a lot for our customer.
Exactly. But it's interesting, isn't it, how and I'm not saying people are machines, because they're not, but if you spent the same amount of money on a machine, then what you'd be looking at a maintenance schedule that had that had appropriate people taking care of it. You'd be very interested in the output from it. And the money
depreciating it every month over the next 3 years, 5 years.
Yes, but you'd be very interested in the output, and you'd be very interested in taking care of it, and yet you spend the same amount of money on people. And you just focus on the cash you spent up front. And another thing to think about as well, when it comes to why you should take an interest in people's well-being, is if somebody can't tell you that they're ill, then they're also not going to be able to put their hand up if there's an ethical issue. If you can't even bring, a bit of yourself to work that says, actually I'm struggling with this, then are they really going to be able to whistle blow when there's a big problem, or are they just going to stand by and let it happen and let the C-suite then carry the blame at the end of the day?
That comes down to that trust equation. It's the very foundation of high-performing teams. Is it Patrick Lencioni, is it? Who had the 5 dysfunctions of a team, as a little triangle. I'm sure it's very similar to Maslow's hierarchy, but the bottom of that is trust. Unless teams trust each other, you don't get the honest dialogue with each other that brings out those issues, whether they're good or bad.
Absolutely. And so as accountants, ethics is a big it's a big thing. And when it comes to how we treat people, when it comes to how we treat the environment, these are all things which are going to start to bring out that ethical part of the conversation. Because let's face it, if you've got a business that pollutes the environment, the first thing that the press do when they're writing up about the terrible things you've done is that they will mention the name of your chief exec and how much they're paid. That's just a given.
That's right.
It's just a given. This is how much this person's paid for doing this bad stuff. So so you've really got to sort of look at that from that bigger perspective, is how does everyone else going to look at what we're doing, and what value judgments are they going to put on us because of it?
Well, so there's so much to take in this. How do you feel, say, I use ACCA because we both know them, but the accounting profession generally are doing? How are we going on helping to build well-being and awareness of us and the value of us into say some of the research and thought leadership that's being done, and how we're training our future accountants?
Yeah, I think we're at the start of a journey. I think that, you know, this has been the last 18 months has really been the first time that we've thought about satisfaction in that same way. You know, we've thought about, you go back to sort of 2016, 2017, where we did some research with ACCA on the 7 quotients. And, you know, that was where we started to highlight all the other things other than the real technical stuff, all the other things that accountants need to have or become or learn in order to be really high performing. And of course, one of those is emotional intelligence. Well, emotional intelligence is about self-awareness. And it's also, I mean, yes, it goes into relationship management. Yes, it goes into social awareness and all of those things, but it starts with self-awareness. And I think that we've touched on some of these things, and we put out an element across the market generally of some of this stuff around self-awareness, but we don't necessarily train people very clearly in it. I know ACCA have produced a self tool. You can have a self-assessment tool you can have a look at. But again, this was several years ago, and we're not repeatedly putting this at the front of where we are. Yeah. But I actually think that, you know, if the more self-aware you are, the easier it is to empathize with other people, because you can actually spot other things as they're happening. You're no longer a hostage to your own emotions, which means that when an emotional circumstance appears in front of you, whether that's a team member, a family member, a client, or whatever, you actually have that space and those tools to be able to step back and make different quality decisions, not just based on gut reactions.
Yeah, right.
So based on fear.
Yeah, so I think ACCA specifically have done really well to lay out that sort of broad landscape, because there's a lot of aspects that go beyond just your technical bits and you know, the ethics that are at the core of what we are as accountants. So, you know, I think it's the depth that it's sort of hard to do across so many different areas that accountants need to be aware of. So the question, first of all, what I'm picking up from you, which I absolutely agree with, is there's a personal responsibility part of us. We can help you as a profession. ACCA can help individual accountants to be aware of the kind of things that you need to be getting on top of individually, and then after that you have to sort of follow that rabbit hole yourself to where it takes you. And that's probably my next question. Where do they get that? What channels do individuals have to be able to educate themselves, inform themselves, develop?
Yeah, so I'd say that emotional intelligence is a really accessible way forward for a lot of people, you know, whether it's accountants, leaders generally. So you've got a number of different options on that. So there's books on it that are fairly easy reads. So Travis Bradbury's written quite a good book on that, called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. But there's Daniel Goleman. He's written The Gold Mine on it, but it can be quite a heavy read, so that may not necessarily fit with that. But of course, a lot of this is in the practice. So you can read it, but then you need to actually act upon it. So yeah, I mean, I deliver quite a few talks on this sort of thing to actually give some practical ways of looking at things and challenging yourself. Yeah. So that when something does happen, you think, okay, I now have a process of how to approach it. So I can approach it in a different way, which will make me a better leader. But also it helps your relationships generally. So it is a really good accessible way of self-coaching in a lot of ways, without having to go into deep therapy or anything like that, but actually having some tools that go, okay, this has happened, how am I going to
so often it's about awareness, and then it's about recognition, and then it's about strategies for how to deal with that. Like, that's the same in any aspect of business, you know, any sort of problem solving process goes through that, you know, being
Exactly.
aware that there's a problem here, recognizing what the actual problem is and the underlying root cause, and then taking action to address that. And then, you know, you follow the feedback loop and see how can you improve on that. Yeah. So I think it's an agile methodology, if I get right down to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is as well, I'd say with because it is looking at emotions, and we might go, oh, I don't know if do we do emotions? I don't know. Do we do emotions? The thing is, everybody's human, and so we all do emotions. And you know,
the one thing we're really good at.
Exactly. And you know, but we all do it. We all get it wrong sometimes. And the thing to remember with emotions is they're not good or bad, they're just emotions.
That's right.
You know, sometimes we can get into a bit of a loop that says, you know, I keep thinking these really dark thoughts or these really terrible outcomes or whatever, but you know, they're just thoughts. And at the end of the day, you don't have to be a hostage to that process or to that thinking, and neither does anybody around you. And I think in learning more about emotional intelligence will teach you more about empathy, and empathy is not the same as sympathy. So sympathy is when somebody comes to you and says, you know, the dog died, and you go, oh, poor you. Oh, look at that, dog died. Poor dog. You know, poor dog. You know, that is, whereas empathy will ask questions around that, around how you feel around that. So you know, the dog died. It will be, oh, so how are you today with that? And is there anything you need me to do to help? Can I help you at all? What's the, you know, just do you want to talk about it?
And, you know, and I think I read in one of your blogs, it's about that ability to listen and to ask empathetic questions that are really going to the care factor, that you actually care about the people that you're talking with.
And I think this is the thing, is that we think when it comes to people, we've got to come up with a solution. And the answer is we definitely don't need to come up with a solution. They need to come up with their solution. So I think there's, you know, we belong to a control environment, if you like, where we have to make sure the solution happens in a certain way. But actually, when it comes to people, it's much more effective if you just listen and then you ask them what they would like to have happen.
So yeah, I think you're talking about that personal responsibility piece again. That it's sort of the solution that most people need to move past whatever it is they're dealing with, whether it's a business problem or a personal problem. The most effective solution is going to be the one that they've worked out themselves is the right one to do, because they're going to stick with it. More likely to stick with it, let's say.
So I think, you know, things like talking about mental health become a lot less scary when, one, you've been educated and you understand what some of the terminology is and what that means. And you can spot some of the signs, so that, again, if you see something in your team and you're like, I don't know, you're not there to diagnose it, you're there just to spot when something's changed.
It's that awareness, recognition, and then your strategy for how you deal with that. It's not necessarily to solve it for the person, but certainly to maybe have a strategy for how to approach that person, how to help them to recognize that they have that problem and that it needs to be dealt with. And, you know, you can do lots of signposting, and as organizations, you can produce, you know, literature that says, okay, so, you know, we've looked at some charities and some organizations locally. So if you need, you know, maybe you've got an employee assistance program that you can say, have you spoken to them about this, which is like an online counselling service. Maybe there's charities locally that they can talk to about grief or bereavement or whatever it is that's happened. And you just present them with that information and say, but I'm here to listen. And there's a whole range of that. I mean, so what the examples you just gave in there were about, you know, people who are on one end of the spectrum in terms of health, but there's a whole spectrum of people, and in order to get to high performance may just mean an iteration of performance. It's that difference between engaged and inspired that you talked about earlier on. It's like, depending on your level, you might be engaged, but if you want to get a lift into inspire, here's a couple of strategies that you might be able to take. And being able to provide that, just that sort of counseling isn't quite the right word I'm thinking of, but it's a safe space, space to talk, Yeah,
and
yeah.
just, so that people know that you're not afraid for them to say something.
It's a
Because
care
again,
factor. It's a care factor, and it goes to that trust thing. It's about a manager really caring about their staff, and vice versa. And we're all working together for something more. Like I don't want to make it sound like it's kumbaya. At the end of the day, it is.
no. But
it is about people
but when it
working
comes to
together
life and
as
death,
teams.
when it comes to life and death, which obviously for most of us in our working life it isn't, but when it comes to life and death, if you speak to anybody in the forces, they sign up in the UK, they sign up for Queen and country, but when it comes to when the bombs start coming down, you do what you do for the man stood next to you.
Yeah, for your mates. Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that's exactly what happens in business. The amount of times when, my previous business was financial services, and we'd had snow or something like that, and I sent everyone home, but there was somebody who wanted to do something they'd promised to a client, and nobody in the office would leave until that is done, and they all pulled together to make that happen because they weren't going to leave anyone behind.
Yeah, right. That's a great note to leave.
So you think about that sort of mentality, that sort of behavior, and are they more inspired? Are they actually going to go that extra mile for your clients? Yes, absolutely. Are they going to go that extra mile for you when you really need them to?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
But you've got to build that. You can't just expect them to turn up ready made and want to do that for you.
Yeah. They've got to believe what you believe. I think it's Simon Sinek talks about that, isn't it? Yeah. Start with why, and if you really believe that, then you'll attract the people who want to work with you. So, and you'll attract the customers that want to buy from you and believe in you. So, yeah,
it's people, purpose, and profit.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's going to be the theme for the next however many years, because at the end of the day, we can go, well, we're all right at the moment, but the world isn't all right. Half of us are drowning and the other half are on fire. You look at the news every day, there's another disaster somewhere. The world's fighting back, and we need to really have a think about our long-term strategy for a lot of this, whether that is environmental stuff, or if you're not really in that space to influence that, then it's going to be about the people that you have around you, because you're going to have to get more adaptable as time moves on, because who knows what's going to be thrown at us next.
So I've just had a thought about our next conversation. I don't think we'll do it right now, but let me just throw this out for you, right? I hear you, and the world is going through change, but I don't think anything's going to change until we figure out how executives are getting paid 300 to 400 times more than the average employee. And I think that's the driver, that's the motivator, that's what drives short-term performance, that is ignorant of the impact that the organization has on its environment and the society around it. And I'd be keen to see how that fits into the well-being idea, and how employees see fairness in that context, and we're all one team and we're all working together. And because there's a lot of examples I could probably point to where the cynicism of employees is almost transparent.
Yeah, and remember, of course, they have a different, the younger generation as well have a different approach because of social media, because of then being very tech savvy. They have a different approach to hierarchies. And so, expect that your under 30s may well email the chief exec and ask them something and not think anything of it.
Yeah.
Whereas you're over 30s, what?
They might even tweet them.
Exactly.
They probably don't even use Twitter anymore.
No, but that sort of communication thing is that they'll use any method to do that. And I know quite a few under 30s who've done just that. And on the one hand, that will highlight them out as potentials for all sorts of different things. If you don't have the culture that says that that's okay, that's acceptable, then what's going to happen. You're going to start to lose the people that have got that initiative, that go, do you know what, I've spotted this and I don't think it's right, I'm going to tell the chief exec this.
So tell me, Sharon, we'll wrap this up. Tell me, where can we find out more from you?
It's discoveryourbounce.com.
Oh, I love it. Very nice.
Or you can, as a speaker, I do speak on lots of different topics around environmental social governance and emotional intelligence, and how to build resilience and thrive. And SharonCritchlow.com is my speaker page.
Love it. Well, thanks very much for the last 45 minutes or so chat, and yeah, we'll definitely catch up again. I think I'd really like to pick into that one about the pay gap and see where that takes us.
Yes. Well, you've got to wonder, don't you, really, when it comes to the pay gap, is why it's there.
Yes. We'll see next time. All right. Good chatting to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
No worries.